It was a Wednesday night, 11:14. Ashland had been raining since afternoon, the asphalt outside my house holding the streetlight like an open wound. I heard the knock, not urgent, not shy. I opened the door. She stood there, hair streaming down her shoulders, cream sweater slipping off one shoulder, a brown canvas bag against her hip, her car parked tight to the curb. She wasn't crying. She said, "I don't have anywhere to go tonight." I looked at her longer than I needed to. I said, "You can stay one night." She stepped across the threshold. She placed something small on the entry table, a small wooden bird. I didn't know that night that she had kept it for 4 years. "My name is Silas Bramwell. I'm 40 years old. I live in Ashland, a small town tucked into the southern edge of Oregon where winter comes early and the streets close down by 9 at night. I run a small workshop on Lithia Way called Bramwell Restoration. I bring old things back, antique chairs with broken backs, dining tables that have held 3 generations of dinners, upright pianos that have stopped speaking, sometimes a violin when someone trusts me with one. My father was a carpenter in eastern Washington, and he taught me one thing that mattered more than any tool: listen to the wood before you cut it. Wood remembers. It tells you where it wants to bend and where it would rather break, if you have the patience to hear it. My life has the shape of a slow, careful loop. Morning walk through Lithia Park while the mist is still on the grass. Black coffee at Brick Room on the corner of Main and Pioneer. 10 hours in the shop. Home to my small craftsman house on Iowa Street, the white porch paint gone gray from sun. I cook one meal. I read one chapter. I sleep. The repetition isn't poverty. It's what a quiet man builds when he learns that quiet is a thing worth building. 2 years before that Wednesday night, my wife and I signed the papers that ended 8 years of marriage. Her name is Cassandra Pierce. She's an interior architect, the kind who walks into a room, and the room rearranges itself to make space for her. We had no children. We had different ideas of what a life was for. She wanted Portland, the bright lights of a name on a glossy cover, dinners with people who knew people. I wanted Ashland. I wanted the smell of pine shavings and the sound of nothing in particular. Neither of us was wrong. We were only different. I met Marlo 4 years before that Wednesday night, before the divorce, even though I didn't understand at the time what I'd met. Her full name is Marlo Driscoll. She drove down from Portland one October afternoon, with her grandmother's piano riding in the back of a moving truck, a 1948 Steinway upright walnut case, ivory keys yellowed from a half-century of hands. Her grandmother had just died. The piano was the only thing she'd brought home from the estate. She sat in my shop every afternoon for 3 weeks while I worked on it. She brought a book. She didn't talk. Sometimes she made tea on the small hot plate in the back and set a cup beside me without saying anything. I remember her hands. Small, long fingers. The kind that rest on a piece of wood the way a person rests a hand on a sleeping animal, listening for breath. One afternoon, when the rain was coming sideways against the workshop windows and she had gone out to her car for something, I picked up a scrap of leftover pine. I carved a small bird, a wren, no bigger than my thumb. I tucked it under the lid of the piano, just inside, where the dampers meet the harp. I didn't tell her. I told myself I'd done it because the wood asked for it. Maybe that was true. I delivered the piano to her apartment in Portland 2 days later. I didn't see her again. I learned later, much later, on the night I'll tell you about, that she had found the bird the same week she got the piano home. She didn't call. She didn't write to thank me. She just kept it. 1 year after that delivery, Marlo sold the Portland apartment, packed 2 suitcases, and moved to Ashland. She opened a small bookstore on Granite Street called Granite and Ink. The corner she chose was the same corner I walked past every morning on my way to Brick Room for coffee. The audience already knows what that means. I, on that Wednesday night, did not. 10 months after she opened the store, I ran into her at the coffee counter at Brick Room. I thought it was the first time we'd been in the same room since the piano. She nodded at me. She didn't say more than hello. For the next 2 years, every time I came in, she was there in the farthest corner, a book open, never the first to wave, never the last to leave before I did. I walked past her bookstore 730 times without going in. She had counted every one. That first night, I gave her a clean towel from the linen closet at the top of the stairs. She took a fast shower, came down barefoot in a soft gray t-shirt of mine that hung past her hips, and sat with her feet tucked under her on the corner of the sofa. I made ginger tea because it was what my father used to make when someone in our house was cold or sad or both, and I didn't know how to ask which one she was. She told me the surface reason. Her landlord on Granite Street had sold the building. He had given her 24 hours to be out illegal. She knew, but he was old and panicked, and she didn't have the energy to fight. 2 of her friends hadn't picked up the phone. She had driven around for an hour in the rain. She had sat in her car at the curb of my house for 40 minutes before she gathered the courage to knock. I believed her. Every word of it was true, in the literal sense. It was also true that her car was parked at the curb with the careful neatness of someone who had not arrived in a panic. The wheels were aligned. The bag at her feet had been packed for longer than a day, the leather softened by use, the zipper smooth, and inside the bag, though I didn't see it for weeks, was a small spiral notebook gone soft at the corners. In it, in her handwriting, was a list 4 years long. Silas takes his coffee black, no sugar. Silas keeps the fountain pens in the right-hand drawer of the workshop desk. Silas closes the shop on Mondays. Silas wears the brown leather shoes on Fridays, the black ones the rest of the week. Silas eats lunch at the soup and sandwich place on 4th Street on Tuesdays. The audience saw the notebook in her bag the moment she walked through my door. I did not. The next morning, I came down to the kitchen, and the coffee was already made. Exactly the strength I liked. She was sitting on the back step in the cold blue light, looking at the small, overgrown garden I'd been meaning to fix for 2 summers. I poured a cup and stood in the doorway behind her. "You knew I took it black?" I asked. She turned her head, just enough that her hair fell across her cheek. "I guessed," she said. I believed her. I shouldn't have believed her. I told her over breakfast that she could stay a few nights until she found a new place. She looked at the table for a long moment and then said yes, but she would pay rent. I said no. She said she would cook then. I said yes. Thursday night she made spaghetti. She didn't ask. She just opened the cupboards, found what she needed, and cooked the way someone cooks who has been cooking for one for a long time. She put the bowl down in front of me and slid the Parmesan within reach. There was no raw onion in the sauce, only garlic gentled into the oil first. I have not been able to eat raw onion since I was 26 and had food poisoning from a deli sandwich in Eugene. I had told one person that in my life my doctor and the doctor had retired. I could not remember telling her. I ate the spaghetti and didn't say anything. I noticed she had set out a clean dish towel next to my plate, the way my mother used to set one beside my father's. I noticed I didn't dislike it. Friday morning, on the way out the door, I noticed the wooden bird still standing on the entry table. I picked it up. It fit my palm the way it had fit my palm when I made it. There was something half familiar about the way the wing curved, about the soft sanded place on the underside where my thumb had once worked the grain smooth. I stood there for 10 seconds in my coat with my keys in my other hand, and then I set it back down and went to work. The thought stayed with me all morning, the way a splinter stays in a finger you can't quite find. Friday evening when I came home, she was at the kitchen table with a stack of book invoices and a calculator. She had pulled her hair back. The lamp threw a soft circle of light over her hands. She looked up when I came in, said hi, and went back to her numbers. There was a glass of water beside my place at the table that hadn't been there in the morning. I'd mentioned, 2 evenings before, that I sometimes forgot to drink enough water at the shop. She had remembered. I sat down across from her without saying anything. She didn't look up again. It was the most ordinary thing that had ever happened in that kitchen, and I sat there for 10 minutes trying to understand why it felt like the room had been waiting for it. Saturday afternoon was overcast and warm and smelled of leaves burning somewhere 2 streets over. She sat on the porch with a paperback and a mug of coffee. I was on the side of the house with a screwdriver, trying to coax a sagging cabinet door back into alignment. Every time I tapped the hinge with the rubber mallet, she turned a page. I noticed it the 3rd time. I noticed it the 4th time. By the 7th time, I understood that her reading rhythm and my hammering rhythm had matched, and that neither of us was going to say a word about it. The air between us was thick, but not heavy. It was the kind of thick a piece of wool gets when it has just begun to absorb water. That night, washing the cutting board at the sink, she said almost as an aside, "My grandmother had a piano." I nodded. I said it must have been beautiful. I did not connect it. The audience, somewhere on the other side of the screen, was screaming at me. Sunday morning she asked if I wanted to see her shop. I said yes. We walked through Lithia Park, past the duck pond where the early morning mist still clung to the water, past the bandshell empty for the season, up to Granite Street. Granite and Ink was a single room with a bay window, 2 armchairs by a small wood stove that wasn't lit, and the warm, dry smell of old paper that I have always loved more than the smell of any flower. And on the front counter, beside the register, was a small wooden bird, bigger than the one on my entry table, clumsier, a first attempt by hands that were learning the knife. But anyone who had carved one would have recognized the second instantly. She had tried to copy mine. I didn't say anything. She didn't either. She just watched my face for half a second and then turned to put a stack of new arrivals on the table by the window. That Sunday night I went home and sat in the workshop for 2 hours without turning on the lights. The street outside got dark. The neighbor's dog barked twice and then settled. I began to understand, in the slow way a man understands a thing he is not yet ready to know. I left the workshop. I went upstairs. I did not turn on my bedside lamp. I lay on top of the covers in my clothes and listened to her brushing her teeth in the bathroom down the hall, and I understood that I had begun, sometime in the last 6 days, to listen for the sound of her at 6 o'clock when she came home from the store. I had never listened for anyone in that way before. I didn't say so. She didn't ask. The warmth was coming in like water into wood. There were no declarations. There were no first touches. Once, reaching for the teapot at the same instant, our hands almost met. She pulled hers back first. She always pulled hers back first. "You don't have to be quiet in my house," I told her one evening, when she had been moving around the living room as if she were trying not to leave a footprint. "I'm not being quiet," she said. "I'm listening." By the end of the second week, I had forgotten she was allowed to leave, and she, I think, had forgotten she had ever planned not to stay. It was a Thursday afternoon in the 3rd week. I was in the shop, kneeling beside a cabinet base I'd been rebuilding for a client in Medford, measuring the new shelf rails against the old ones with a square that had been my father's. My phone vibrated against the workbench. Cassandra. I stared at the name for 2 rings before I picked up. "She wanted to come by that evening," she said. "There were some boxes of hers still in my garage, old portfolio sketches, a couple of design school textbooks, the kind of thing she'd promised to clear out a year ago and never had. She said she'd be by around 7. I said all right. Cassandra had not called ahead of a visit in 8 years of marriage and 2 years of divorce. She had always simply arrived, the way weather arrives. If she was calling, she knew something. I understood that the moment I hung up, the way you understand a door that has been locked. I didn't yet know what she knew. I learned later that a mutual friend of ours, a woman she'd kept on retainer for gossip, I suspect had seen Marlowe and me at Brick Room the previous Friday morning. Marlowe had slid a coffee toward me across the counter. The small intimacy of a gesture between people who lived in the same house. The news had reached Cassandra in less than 48 hours. She arrived at 6:55 in a white SUV that I no longer recognized. She wore a long camel coat and the perfume she had always worn, the one that filled a room before she did, sharp and floral and just a little metallic underneath. She walked into my house the way she had always walked into my house, as if she had never once left it. She saw a pair of Marlowe's small boots beside the door, neatly placed on the mat. She did not ask whose they were. She smiled. "You've been busy, Silas," she said. Marlowe came in at 7:04. She had walked from the store, a paper bakery bag in her arms full of warm sourdough rolls for dinner. She stopped in the doorway to the living room. She saw Cassandra. She did not step back. She did not step forward. Her face did the thing her face had always done. It settled, like a body of water after a stone has gone all the way to the bottom. Cassandra turned on me. Her voice was the voice she used to use when she had decided to be kind, and was going to use kindness as a knife. Sweet as honey, laced with mercury. "I've been asking around about your guest," she said. "It's amazing what people in a small town will tell you. Did you know she moved here 1 year, almost to the week, after we signed the divorce papers? Did you know she chose that storefront because it's on the corner you walk every morning? Did you know she has been sitting in the far corner of Brick Room for 2 years now, never once being the first to say hello? always waiting for your back to turn so she could watch you go? People in that coffee shop have noticed her, Silas. People have wondered. Apparently I am the last person to have heard. She let that hang in the air. I'm sorry, she went on, with a small, soft smile that was not sorry at all. I'm sorry to be the one to say it. But this is not a coincidence. This is not a woman who fell into your life. This is a woman who hunted you for years, and you were just the last one to know. Every sentence Cassandra said was true. True in the worst possible meaning of true. I felt the floor tilt. I felt 4 years rearrange themselves in 30 seconds. Every accidental meeting not accidental. Every time she had known I took my coffee black, not a guess. The notebook I didn't yet know existed. The wooden bird on the entry table, not anonymous. I turned to Marlowe. She was still in the doorway, still holding the paper bag. The bread inside was steaming faintly into the cool air of the hallway. She was looking at me, not at Cassandra. Her hand tightened on the rolled-down top of the bag. I waited for her to say it wasn't true. I waited for her to defend herself. I waited for the version of this where she explained, where she made it small, where she made it nothing. What she said was, "I'm sorry, Silas. I didn't want you to find out this way." That was worse than anything Cassandra had said. She didn't argue. She didn't even try. There was a small part of me, in those few seconds, that was waiting for the explanation that would let me forgive her in one breath. There was no explanation. There was only her standing in my hallway with a bag of warm bread, looking at me the way a person looks when they have known for a long time that this moment was coming and have already lived through it once in their head. I have never been a man who shouts. I didn't shout then. I said, evenly, "The way you say a thing once because you can't trust yourself to say it twice, you should leave." She nodded. She didn't cry. She set the bakery bag on the side table. The bread still warm, the paper crackling softly under her hand, and she walked out into the rain that had started up again sometime in the last 20 minutes. I heard her car door. I heard the engine. I heard her drive away. The taillights swept once across the wet glass of the front window, and were gone. Cassandra was still standing in the middle of the living room like a victory she had brought with her. "I only thought you deserved to know the truth," she said. I looked at her for a long moment. There were a lot of things I could have said. What I said was, "You should leave too." She stiffened. She had not expected that. "Silas, you should leave too." She left. This time she didn't turn around. I sat in the living room until 2 in the morning. The bread on the side table went cold and then went hard. The fridge hummed in the empty kitchen. The rain hit the roof in fat, slow drops, the kind that drum on shingle the way someone knocking on a door drums on wood, not urgent, not shy. Sometime past midnight I got up and walked to the entry table. The wooden bird was still standing where she had placed it. I picked it up for the first time in 3 weeks and held it under the small lamp. I turned it over. Carved into the underside of the right wing, in letters smaller than a grain of rice, were 3 marks I had made the afternoon. I had carved her my initials and the year, S.B. 2022. My letters, my hand, my carving knife. I knew. I had not let myself remember, but I had always known. "You call it hunting," I had said earlier to Cassandra, when she had used that word a second time and looked at me as if expecting laughter. "I'm trying to think of what else it might be called." She had not had an answer. Cassandra left my house that night believing she had won something. She didn't understand. I had just lost a thing I hadn't quite known I had. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't open the shop the next morning. I walked through Lithia Park in the cold half-light before the joggers came out, the breath of the duck pond rising off the water in slow, soft sheets. I walked up Granite Street. The lights of granite and ink were off. The sign on the door said closed in her handwriting. I stood across the street for a long time. I didn't go in. That evening, just after 11, the rain came back. I was sitting on the sofa with the lamp off when I heard the knock, not urgent, not shy, exactly the rhythm of the first time. I went to the door. I opened it. She was standing there. Same place, same rain. This time no canvas bag, no suitcase. Only her, in a black raincoat, and her hair already wet through where the hood had fallen back. She did not step in. She stayed on the porch. I think she had decided, somewhere on the drive over, that she did not have the right to step in until I said she did. She started to speak slowly, The way someone speaks when they have rehearsed something in their head for 4 years, and only now is the head letting them say it out loud. Her grandmother, Eleanor Driscoll, had taught piano in a small upstairs studio in Portland for 40 years. When she died, Marlowe inherited the 1948 Steinway. It was the one object in the estate she had wanted. She wanted the best restorer in Oregon. There were 3 names on a list a friend gave her. I was the 3rd name. The first restorer was retiring. The second restorer didn't take Steinways anymore. That was the only reason she'd ended up in Ashland. She drove down to Ashland in October of 2022. She sat in my workshop every afternoon for 3 weeks because she didn't want to leave the piano. That was true, but it was also true that by the 2nd week, she had stopped driving back to Portland in the evenings. She had rented a small room above the diner on Siskiyou Boulevard. She had stayed in Ashland to watch me work, to watch a man she did not know rebuild the inside of the last thing her grandmother had touched. She found the wooden wren 2 days after I delivered the piano back to Portland. She had lifted the lid one evening to play, and there it was, perched inside the dampers like it had always been there. She did not call. She did not write to thank me. She kept it on her bedside table. She told me, standing on my porch in the rain, that she had held it in her hand every night for a year before she could put it down. There were evenings, she said, when she had taken it down to the piano and set it on top of the lid and played for her grandmother, the way her grandmother had played for her when she was 7. She had not told anyone any of this. She was telling me now because there was no version of the next sentence she could say to me without saying it first. 1 year later, her grandmother already buried, the Portland apartment already sold. She had a small amount of money and no city to belong to. She chose Ashland. She chose Granite Street because of the corner and the morning walk. She opened the bookstore. She did not, she said, ever plan to be in my life. She planned only to be near where I existed because after her grandmother died, mine was the only place that had felt warm to her. She had not planned to speak. She had not planned to stay. On the Wednesday night, the landlord pushed her out. The eviction was real, but there were 3 friends she could have called. She did not call them. She came to my house because she had been waiting 4 years, and she had finally run out of reasons not to. "I'm sorry, Silas," she said, the rain darkening the shoulders of her coat. "I didn't want you to find out the way Cassandra said it. I wanted to tell you, I just couldn't find the first sentence." She stopped. She looked at the wet porch boards. I stood there in the doorway with the lamplight on my back and the cold air on my face, and I thought about 4 years. I thought about 730 mornings I had walked past her store without going in. I thought about the way her hand had pulled back from mine at the teapot, always, always first. And I thought I had been waiting too. I just hadn't known who I was waiting for. I didn't pull her inside. I didn't kiss her. I did not yet have the right to either of those things. I said, "Go home. Tonight. Sleep. Come to my workshop tomorrow at 10. She looked up. She nodded twice. She said, "I know loving someone from a distance for 4 years sounds sick." "I don't think so," I said. "I'm thinking that 4 years is a very long time to keep a small bird." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. She turned. She walked out into the rain to her car. The drain pipe on the corner of the house was broken, had been broken since the first storm of the season, and the water came down in a thin, steady rope onto the wet gravel. She drove away. I did not sleep that night, but I was no longer awake out of pain. I was awake because tomorrow morning, at 10 o'clock, she would come to my workshop. She came at 5 minutes before 10. I was already there, the kettle on for tea. She did not apologize this time. She didn't have to. She handed me a coffee from Brick Room, black, no sugar, exactly the way I take it. I handed her a clean square of pine. "Carve one," I said. She laughed a real laugh, the first one I had seen her not bother to hide. For the next 6 weeks we did not love each other in the way people from the outside would have recognized. We walked through Lithia Park every Sunday morning, our hands not touching, our breath visible in the cold air. We replaced the rotting board on my porch step together, my hands holding the plank and her hands driving the nails. She read in the front window of granite and ink in the afternoons, and I came in after closing the shop and sat in the armchair across from the counter, in the same corner where she had once sat watching me from across a coffee shop. Now, I was the one watching. Now, I was the one who had been waiting too. One Tuesday evening in November, 15 minutes before her closing time, I walked into the store. I set a small carved bird on her counter beside the register, where the clumsier first attempt of hers had once sat. A wren, the same size as the first one I'd ever made. I turned it over so the underside of the right wing faced up. There, carved fresh, were my initials and the new year. "This one has the right year on it," I said. She didn't say anything for a long moment. She looked at it. She looked at me. She closed the store early that night, locked the door, turned off the front lights, and walked with me down Granite Street to the corner without saying a word the whole way. The first time we touched on purpose was not a kiss. I was helping her carry a box of new arrivals from the front of the store into the storage room at the back. The box was heavier than it looked, and we both reached at the same instant, and my hand closed over hers on the cardboard handle. Neither of us pulled back. Neither of us said a word about it. The box went into the storage room. The contact stayed. Cassandra called twice in early November. I didn't answer. She left a long message I deleted without listening to. She sent a text, pages of it, all of it her reasoning for what she had done. None of it apology, and I did not reply. By December she stopped. I heard, eventually, that she had moved back to Portland for good. Cassandra did not have a place in a quiet world, and I was building a quiet world. There is no room, in a quiet world, for a woman whose love sounds like a verdict. 8 months later, it was June. Late spring in Ashland is a forgiving thing. The rain still arrives without warning, but the evenings stretch long and gold past 9 o'clock, and the lilacs come out along the fences on Iowa Street, heavy and purple, and almost too sweet to walk past. Marlo still had her apartment on Granite Street. She had not moved into my house. That was something she did not want, and something I respected. "I don't want to be rescued," she had said once, sitting on my back step at dusk with a cup of tea between her hands. "I want to be chosen. There's a difference. I want you to walk to me. I don't want to be a thing you let in because it rained." But she had a key to my house. I had a key to her store. Both keys lived on the same plain steel ring on the entry table next to the small wooden bird, which had not moved from where she had placed it that first wet Wednesday night in October. Granite and ink had a new section by then, a shelf in the back left corner she had labeled, in her handwriting on a small card, Bramwell. Books on woodworking, antique furniture, the lost trades of American craftsmanship, a slim history of the Steinway Company. On the top shelf, behind a small pane of glass, sat the first wooden wren, the one I had carved in 2022 and tucked into the lid of her grandmother's piano. Customers asked about it sometimes. She would tell them part of the story, never the whole of it. The whole of it she kept for herself. That June, on a Wednesday night, the rain came. It came without warning, the way it always did in this town. It was 11:14 on the wall clock in the kitchen. I was sitting on the sofa with the lamp off when I heard the knock, not urgent, not shy. The exact rhythm of a knock I had heard now twice before. I opened the door. She was standing there, hair wet, the same cream sweater she had worn that first night. Though the canvas bag was gone, the suitcase was gone, there was nothing in her arms at all. She did not say what she had said the first time. She said, very quietly, "What if I want forever?" This time the question was not about one night. I did not answer with words. I stepped across the threshold, out, not in. I came onto the porch with her. I stood beside her in the rain, my socks getting wet through where they met the wet boards, my shirt darkening in seconds at the shoulders. I took her hand. For the first time, neither of us pulled back. Behind me, through the open door, the hallway light fell warm and yellow onto the entry table, and on the entry table the small wooden bird stood where it had always stood, a witness to 4 years of waiting and to the 40 seconds in which the waiting ended. "I'm keeping my apartment on Granite," she said after a while. Her voice was steady, like a person stating the shape of their own life so the other person could see it clearly. "Keep it," I said. "I only need you to have a place to come home to." "And a place to come home from." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She turned her face into my shoulder, and the rain went on around us, and the streetlight at the end of Iowa Street flickered once, the way streetlights do in small towns where nothing important is supposed to be happening. 4 years she had waited, and I hadn't known. 8 months I had waited for her to know that I was waiting too. That June night on the porch, in the rain, neither of us was waiting anymore. I'm writing this on a Monday morning in September, 3 years after the night she first knocked. Marlo is at the store. I'm at the workshop. The small wooden bird is still on the entry table at home, exactly where she set it down on that wet Wednesday night. I have never moved it. Neither has she. I used to think love was supposed to be loud, loud like Cassandra, like a declaration, like an insistence, like a name on a glossy cover. I was wrong about that for 8 years. It took a woman standing on my porch in the rain, asking for nothing and promising nothing, holding a wooden bird she had kept for 4 years for me to understand that love, the real kind, is mostly a patience that doesn't have a name. Cassandra isn't in this story anymore. I heard a while ago that she remarried in Portland. I'm glad. She chose right. It just wasn't me. Marlo and I are not married. Not yet. Maybe not ever. We don't need a piece of paper to know what we are. Sometimes the person you need is not the loudest one, or the brightest one, or the one who arrives in a hurry, but the one who waited for you in the quietest possible way. You can stay one night, I said at the door. What if I want forever? She whispered, 8 months later, in the same rain. It took me 3 years to understand that I had said yes from the moment I opened the door. So tonight I want to ask you 2 things. Have you ever realized that someone had been loving you, from a distance, for a long time and you never knew? And if a single rainy night could change the rest of your life, would you open the door? If this story reached you, tap like so, I know you're listening. Subscribe for the next quiet story out of Ashland. Leave a comment, would you open the door or close it?